Discourses by Mayor Bava, Volume 3, Qualifications of the Aspirant, Part 3, Readiness to Serve, pages 127 through 134, revised 6th edition, reading by Stuart Baker. Readiness to serve according to aptitude and ability. The aspirant always has to be in readiness to serve the cause of humanity. He need not apply himself to any type of work, irrespective of his capacity. He has to select that portion of work which he's qualified to do by virtue of his individual aptitude and abilities. But whatever service he can render by virtue of his capacity, he renders even when the circumstances are most trying. No claims of limited I. The ordeals through which he may have to pass are many, but his determination to serve whenever possible must remain unshaken. He is not in any way attached to the idea of service, however, in the sense of maximum results being secured through himself alone. If any service needs to be rendered, he is willing to render it with any amount of sacrifice, but he is never bound by the false idea, I alone should have the credit for doing it. If the privilege of rendering the service falls to the lot of someone else, he's not envious. If he were to seek opportunities for himself to render service, it would be a form of selfishness. In service which really counts in the spiritual life, there can be no thought of the self at all. There should be no necessity felt to have something for oneself or of being the one who can give something to others. The self in all its forms has to be left entirely out of the picture. Service should spring out of the spontaneity of freedom if and when it is necessary. And it has to come in the cooperative spirit in which there's no insistence upon the claims of the limited I. Freedom from opposites of great and small things. If the aspirant is completely detached from all works and their results, he becomes free from the vitiating opposites of the great things and small things. The worldly minded feel their separative existence through achievements. Therefore, they have a natural tendency to judge their achievements in terms of tangible quantities. They grasp at great things and avoid the little things. From the spiritual point of view, the so-called little things are often seen to be as important as the so-called great things. The aspirant has no motive to eschew the one and seek the other. Therefore, he attends to little things with as much zest as to great things. Conventions restrict scope of service. In the spiritual life, even little things matter as much as great things, but the conventions of the world usually fail to recognize this simple truth. By following conventionally accepted ideas, the scope of possible service to fellow beings gets artificially restricted to those things which are conventionally regarded as important. So many things which really are of vital importance to life are neglected, with the result that life is spiritually impoverished. Accepted values determine fields of service. So in a society which is dominated by merely material conceptions of life, service is interpreted in terms of providing for bread or clothes or other physical amenities of existence. In a society which is responsive to the value of intellectual culture, service is interpreted in terms of spreading learning in different forms. In a society which has developed taste for beauty, service is interpreted in terms of organizing the production and distribution of works of art. In a society which is responsive to the ineffable values of the heart, service is interpreted in terms of constructing those channels which will facilitate the culture and expression of the heart. In a society which is alive to the supreme importance of spirit, service is interpreted in terms of imparting spiritual understanding. Of these different types of service, the service which is concerned with spiritual understanding is the highest, because spiritual understanding includes the right perspective to all human problems and promotes their solution. Two kinds of service. If there is no spiritual understanding, the desire for rendering service to others is harnessed by limited conceptions. Service is of two kinds. It consists in adding to the lives of others those things which are really worthwhile, or it consists in removing from the lives of others those handicaps which prevent them from having things which are worthwhile. If our ideas of things which are worthwhile are narrow, the scope of possible service also becomes correspondingly narrow. Little things that matter. The scope of service is not limited to great gestures like giving big donations to public institutions. They also serve to express their love in little things. A word that gives courage to a drooping heart, or a smile that brings hope and cheer in gloom, has as much claim to be regarded as service as onerous sacrifices and heroic self-denials. A glance which wipes out bitterness from the heart and sets it throbbing with a new love is also service, although there may be no thought of service in it. When taken by themselves, all these things seem to be small. But life is made up of many such small things. If these small things were ignored, life would not only be unbeautiful, but unspiritual. Element of error in worldly estimates. Just as the worldly minded have a tendency to judge positive contributions in terms of magnitudes, so they also make a similar mistake in judging obstacles, handicaps, and adversities. Thus, for most persons, the adversity of another must assume colossal proportions if it is to deserve notice. It is characteristic of the worldly minded to give more importance to things that take shape in external and tangible ways than to things which are silent elements of inner life. Devastating war, for example, is considered to be a greater calamity than lingering lives filled with bitter hatred. Though from the purely spiritual point of view, lives filled with bitter hatred are not in any way less evil than devastating war. War assumes so much importance because of the many visual instances of cruelty, but hatred is equally unbeautiful, even when it does not materialize itself into outward action. In the same way, epidemics, injuries, and the sufferings of the deathbed invite more attention from the worldly minded than the agonies of the heart, which is heavy with a burden of unquenchable desire. Field of service is life as a whole. For the aspirant who is eager to serve without any desire for recognition and credit, everything that thwarts or perverts the release of full life is worthy of attention, irrespective of whether it is great or small in the opinion of the world. Just as the building up or the collapse of empires has a place in the flow of universal life, so the fleeting moments of sadness also have their own place in it. The importance of the one should not be measured in terms of the other, and the claims of the one should not be ignored for the claims of the other. The aspirant looks at life as an integral whole without allowing any part to monopolize his attention at the cost of others. Service springing from love ensures harmony. Even when the aspirant is rendering a service which is selfless, he keeps constant guard upon his mind. The aspirant must be humble, honest, and sincere. The service he renders must not be for the sake of mere show, and it should be an outcome of true love. If the aspirant is inspired by love, his love will enable him to be in complete harmony with other co-workers without being jealous. If there's not complete harmony amongst the co-workers, the service which is rendered falls short of the spiritual ideal. Further, if the aspirant renders the outward service without a spirit of love, he is acting from a sense of duty, as in many worldly institutions where there are paid workers. In the institutions of the world, people work for pay. At best, it is a cold sense of duty, which prompts them to be efficient. Their work cannot have the inward beauty of work which is spontaneously done out of love. Importance of contact with the master. The aspirant can best assimilate the lessons of true service if he has the good fortune to be in contact with a master. The master teaches not through preaching, but through example. When the master is seen in his capacity of rendering service to humanity, the aspirant is quick to catch that spirit because of his love for the master. Contact with the master is also helpful in imbibing the spirit of cooperation, which the aspirants can cultivate easily because of their common love for the master. They serve because the master wants it. They do the master's work, not their own. And they do it not of their own accord, but because they've been entrusted with that work by the master. Therefore, they're all free from any ideas of individualistic claims, rights, or privileges, being keen only about the master's work, ready to serve his cause to the best of their ability when they're called upon to do so, and equally ready to hand over that work to another co-aspirant if he can do it better. Service without fuss. In cooperation of this type, the aspirants are in a way serving each other because the master's work is accepted by them all as their own. And in being useful to a co-aspirant in doing the master's work, the aspirant is rendering a service to him as much as to the master. In such service, there can be no bossing because the aspirant is always conscious that it is the master's work which he has accepted as his own that he's doing. He further knows that as aspirants, they're all equal, and it is easy for him to cultivate the habit of serving in the spirit of utter humility. If service makes him proud, he might as well not have served. One of the most difficult things to learn is to render service without bossing, without making a fuss about it, and without any consciousness of high and low. In the world of spirituality, humility counts at least as much as utility. Ideal of service. When the master serves others, he does so not because he's attached to the work, but in order to help, and also to set to his disciples an example in selfless service. While serving others, he sees himself in them and experiences having served himself. In his unwaning, blissful feeling of oneness, the master knows himself to be at once the Lord of all and the servant of all. He therefore exemplifies the ideal of service in which there's no enslavement, either of him who receives service or of him who renders it. The aspirant can speedily realize the ideal of true service if he has before him the example of the master. But the spiritual preparation of the aspirant can never be termed complete unless he has learned the art of rendering service which gives not boredom but joy, which brings not enslavement but freedom, which does not set claims and counterclaims, but springs from the spontaneity of free give and take, which is free from the burden of personal want, and which is sustained by the sense of ever renewed fulfillment. Jai Baba.